it's Benny the Bookie, and this is my channel. Today, we are going to be reviewing A Time of Courage by Gwynne. Uh, this is the third book of Blood and Bone. I have very much enjoyed the first two books of the series, and I have to say the third book, just wow. It is a great book. No spoilers that I'll be giving today, but definitely this is a great book. Gwynne, if you aren't reading Gwynne and you're a fan of fantasy, old school fantasy, you definitely have to give him a try. Once again, it's the same formula. We have several different POVs, a couple villains, and a couple of the good guys, or like what I like to call put into groups like Team Cadishim, which are the demons, and Team Benelim, which are the angels. And not to give any spoilers, but the book basically is there are some skirmishes between Team Benelim and Team Cadishim in the third book. And then finally, we get them all together for the great battle, which, the Cadishim and the Benelim have been fighting for 2,000 years. So they're ready to get this over with finally, once and for all, winner take all. And that's what you get for the last 200 pages. And it is terrific. And once again, the thing that impresses me so much about Gwynne is how he does his characters and how he uses the third person POV to where you become very entrenched with certain characters. You identify with them. You get to know their motivations. And he does it so well. You might not always agree with their motivations, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit, not with giving any spoilers. But it's amazing, and I love the villains. The villain point of views are probably my favorites. In this book, you have Fritha and Jin of Team Cadishim, and they're great. Both of them are just great. They're great POVs, and you get an idea, and I think what Gwynne does so well, even with his villains, is that motivation. With Fritha, she in a sense wants to be loved. She wants to be a mother. And granted, when you read these pages, her being a mother and the creatures that she creates, that she considers her babies, well, they're a little horrific. And maybe I will give a little bit of spoilers here and there, so if you haven't read the first two books of the series, I very strongly recommend that you not look at this review. Because you really can't talk about the third book without getting into a little bit of spoilers. And I have to say, the creation for Fritha, her creation of the drag meshed with a talking crow, so you have a talking drag that flies. It's a great character with the name of Wrath. And there's a lot of wrath in this book, the final volume, which I loved. And then you also have Elsa, who was one of her friends. And she gets meshed with this great white worm that you may be familiar from the worms in Faith in the Fallen. So she's half woman, half worm. And she's just horrific, and she's just fun. And you see how Fritha calls these her babies. And she really loves them. And she cares for them. And then you have Jen, who is the head of the Syringe. Wants revenge. She wants revenge on Beletta because Beletta, broke her heart, basically. Not to get into too much of spoilers. And so she has a blood feud among just getting her heart broken and some other things that happen. Of course, if you read the first 2 books, her motivation of this complete revenge, and she's heartbroken. And the other thing is she loves her tribe. And that's the one thing you get in this. And I'll just read this little bit because I think it almost goes with all of the characters in the book. And in a sense, this is what they're all fighting for. And they have all different ways of how they see this. And this is a conversation between Riv and Miyako at Benelim. And he goes, that what we fight for is love and friendship, not schemes and strategies, but people, our kin, our friends, our loved ones. He sighed. This is what Corbin taught me. The mistake is to forget that. And that theme comes out throughout the book. And I think good fantasy in general, it is a question about love, friendship, companionship, and loyalty of bands of characters that you may root for, and in some cases you may not root for. But you understand that motivation, that desire. And you get that feeling in this book, a lot of these POVs, they just want to be loved. And as their hearts are broken, they almost go to the dark side. And the question of revenge and blood revenge and just doing awful things as they let their emotions run them. So you have that going on in the book. And I have to say, I very much enjoyed that the last third of the book is the big battle. It is huge. It is the big battle. Team Kadashim and Team Benelim have finally gotten together, and they are going to take care. They're going to end this for all. The banished lands are going to end this whole thing. And it's wonderful. It's long. It's back and forth, and that's the other thing that John Gwynne does so well is that once the characters have come together, it's almost like you have to wait. For the first few books, it starts to build. The first book, they're mostly separate. They have their own lives, and slowly they begin to come together. And then in book 2, they get closer and closer, and then there's maybe a little bit of where the characters are overlapping some. But then in the third book, it's all together. And with the POVs, he does a great job then of going back and forth. And that's how I think he does a lot of this tension in these stories, is that it'll start with one side, and they're hunting the other side, and the other side will have their POV, and it goes back and forth. And the battles too, you see one side of the battle, Team Kadashim, and then the next second you're seeing a POV from Team Benelim. And it's great. He's got the formula down. If he wants to continue to write this way, he has the formula down. If he wants to do something different in the future, that's fine too. But he really knows how to do this type of fantasy writing, very similar to others, like George R.R. Martin's in the Game of Thrones, of lots of different POVs. So I don't want to get too much into the battles themselves, So that really ruins it. And the main thing with this is if you have invested the first two books and read them, and then come to this third book, you are very much care what happens to the characters in the third book. And there's joy and there's going to be sorrow, as you would expect. As some will live and some will fall. And that's okay. I mean, because in life, you know, that not all the heroes live and not all the villains die. So, now I'm going to give my final thoughts here. And I have to say, and most of my final thoughts are going to be over the whole series now of Blood and Bone. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, you need to give this author a chance. John Gwynne a try. He is that good. And I once again, I think I mentioned in the other video on the second book that I did the review. It's I'm almost sorry that I didn't catch him till later on in my reading journey, because I certainly would have read A Faith of the Fallen a lot sooner. And this series too, I may have been one of those people that was reading it book by book rather than having the opportunity to read all three books together in the trilogy. And I will say this, if you are going to read of Blood and Bone, please read all three books. I mean, the third book is a lot longer than the other two books, but it's all just one big story. That's what it comes down to. It's all just a big story. The first book is almost like a prologue, the beginning. The second book, we get in more into the story and what the plot's going to be. It's developed and we understand it. And then the third book, we get the conclusion where all hell breaks loose from time to time. And we root and we jeer throughout the third book. Also, as mentioned before, and it has to be said again, John Gwynne writes great battle scenes. I think, for me, his combat scenes are probably the best. They're easy to follow. The hand-to-hand, the weapons, the sword play. It's very easy to follow. I mean, I find with some fantasy, it's hard to follow the action itself. And so you can follow it. There's times where maybe you have to go back and read something again because you don't exactly know what happened. But once you read it again, it's clear to you that, yes, I can understand what's going on here. Now, with that said, I mean, the other plus I mentioned was the POVs. And how he does that, how he focuses a POV and he shows the battle from one POV, then switches to another POV and showing that same battle, which is great. I mean, it really gets you to care about the characters. So, final thoughts. And this is going to be over the whole series of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne. I just have to say, it is a great series. You've got to read it. If you're a fan of old school fantasy, you definitely got to read this. It's one thing about fantasy has always been to me is the joy I get from it, the childlike wonder I still get from reading fantasy all these years later. I mean, starting off when I was young, reading C.S. Lewis, and then reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring. There was always that childlike wonder, and you have that with John Gwynne. I mean, I think almost too much. You have, for example, you have giants riding huge bears, battle bears, if you like. And then you have, as mentioned, the Kadashim, who are demons, winged demons flying around. Then you have the angelic Benelin, which are these angelic winged creatures flying around and living in this Spanish land. Let's see, you have the horse tribes. You know, you have Charon, which is led by Jen, and then you have the tribe of Sarek, which is by Bleda. And so you have that, and then you have gladiators, human gladiators, making shield walls. You know, something out, if you're familiar with the movie 300. That's what I always think of when I think of shield walls. It is incredible. And then, I mean, and then he brings in Fritha. Now, Fritha, I mean, she has some crazy creations. And now this is some spoilers, I will say that. And you have to have a little bit of a spoilers when you're talking about a whole series and how much you enjoyed it. And hopefully getting other people to read it. But, oh my gosh, I mean, Fritha's creatures, she had a talking drag that flew. That was a combination of a drag and a talking crow that she meshed together. And then Elsie was this big white worm that you might be familiar from Faith of the Fallen if you read that series by John Gwynne, with her friend. And so it's half this huge worm and part human. And then she created these called the Revenants. And they are vampiric creatures. Just hordes of them. And all of this, you know, and I'm probably forgetting some too. Oh, can't forget the wolfhounds that are running around. And out of all this, it comes all together in this epic 200 pages. You get the payoff, and that's what I love about John Gwynne. You get the payoff. You get the big battle between Team Benelin and Team Kadashim. And it is huge. I mean, the battles are crazy. You have in the air, you have Benelin and Kadashim fighting in the air. You have drag with Fritha riding drag around, wreaking havoc. You got the shield wall set up. You have the horse tribes going at it. And I'm probably forgetting some things here. But there is just so much going on. And it's terrific. It is absolutely terrific. Now, and I think what also always helps about Gwynne, and I've mentioned before, I think he's really mastered the third-person POV. He does such a superb job of where you're focused on that POV in the battle. The great battle at the end of the book, which is probably over 200 pages when it comes together. And you're entrenched in the battle through these POVs. You have the villain POVs, you see it through their eyes. You have what you would call the heroes, Team Benelin, and you see it through their eyes. You know, it is absolutely terrific. It's almost awful because you know, Benny the Bookie has an actual job, and he had to force himself not to stay up late on a work night to finish the book. It's just great. And he also does, John Gwynne, and here's the thing, and I've read now 2 series by him, The Faith of the Fallen and A Blood and Bone, all the Banished Land books. is his combat scenes are terrific and they're easy to follow. Unlike some fantasy, I feel like you really don't know what's going on when combatants are fighting against each other. And he does an excellent job of writing these battle scenes out. Now, there is sometimes where I had to reread sections, or maybe a paragraph here or there, because I was trying to figure out, well, how did this battle end this way? And then when you read it again, you say, oh, I can see that now. I mean, we're dealing with words, so there's always going to be a little bit of limitation. I mean, it's cinematic. I'll give it that. His battle is cinematic. But it's not on the screen, so it's not a movie or a long miniseries, so there's always going to be some limitations, I find, with really picturing what's going on. My one little, well, I have like two, really, criticisms of the book. And the first one is that he does a great job with these POVs, but at times, because of the limitation of the POV he's with at the time in that chapter, it takes a little bit of time to get yourself anchored again with some of the characters. And because of the POVs, I think too, at times it is very chaotic. And that's probably, on purpose by the author. You are in the battle through these POVs. So sometimes it can be where I felt at times I would lose the setting of the battle. I could focus very much on the individual skirmishes during the big battle at the end. But at times I thought I lost kind of the setting of where they were, the battlefield itself. And you're probably going to have that once again, because this is a book and we have words to tell the story, and it's not on film. So, and then the other one, and I think I think I said this 100 times during my final thoughts on John Gwynne in this series, is I always want more. I feel some of the characters during the final battle, they don't get enough time. They don't get enough pages. And there's some of the more minor characters, but still, I think, and maybe that's one thing about John Gwynne, you still care about these minor characters. But some of them I felt they didn't get, I would have liked to see more pages in the final battle. And I think the biggest one for me, is Elsie, the half-worm snake, I guess you would call it, human. She's in there with Fritha, but I think you get more drag, more of the drag. Oh, and I forgot, you got giants riding drags too. Not the flying kind, but and I have to mention the name. I forgot to mention it. I love the name of the flying drag that Fritha creates through a talking crow and a drag is Wrath, and that's just perfect for the book. So, but yeah, there's sometimes some limitations on that, I think, and I mean, otherwise, what are you going to have, 1,000-page book? And so I always want more. So, in conclusion, I'm just going to say this, and others had probably said this also, is that if you are a fan of traditional fantasy, and he also, as I've mentioned, there are some strong women in these pages, you have got to read John Gwynne. And I plan to read his next series. I don't know if I may wait till it's completely finished, because I don't know, if I read the first two books and I get hooked again it's going to be just hell if I have to wait to find out how the story ends. So, I am Benny the Bookie, and as always, please support your public libraries, and we will certainly talk again in the future.